Hey everyone, so we do a video on the quadratic formula. You will use the quadratic formula when you have a quadratic. A quadratic is in the form of ax squared plus bx plus c. So meaning the highest power is 2, that's a quadratic. You will use the quadratic formula when you are solving for x or any solution of a quadratic. That's when it's equal to 0, and you use this when you cannot factor. So it's like an option, and it saves you when you cannot factor AM or GCF or anything like that. So the first thing you want to do is make sure that x squared is equal to 0 and positive. So what I did here was I added the 8x so that I had it equal to 0. And I'm going to state my a, b, and c terms. My a is 4, my b is 8, and my c is -1. And I'm going to substitute those things in for the b, and the a and the c, and the a down here and the b here in my quadratic formula. This is given to you on the reference sheet of the region, so you do not need to memorize it. Alright, so negative b is -8 plus or minus the square root of b squared, which is 8 squared minus 4. A is 4 and c is -1, all over 2 times 4. I'm going to now simplify the inside of the radical, keeping the -8 and making 8 on the bottom because 2 times 4 is 8. The inside of this radical becomes 80 when you plug it into the calculator. Then you're going to want to find out what's the perfect square inside of 80. If you do not know that, go to your calculator and go to y equals and do 80 divided by x and look at the table, and you will see that 16 times 5 is 80, and 16 is perfect. So that's -8 plus or minus 4 square root of 5, because the square root of 16 is 4. And then you want to see if you can reduce, and you can in this case. 4 goes into all these numbers except for the 5, but we do not have to worry about the 5 because he's underneath the radical. But I'm going to divide each of these things by 4. 8 divided by 4 is -2, 4 divided by 4 is 1, and 8 divided by 4 is 2, giving me my final answer of -2 plus or minus 1 radical 5, but I don't need the 1, so I'm just going to make radical 5 over 2. Next question, again, you want to make sure you add the 3 so that you make x squared equal to 0. In this case, it's n. What's going to make my life easier here is pulling out a GCF, and a GCF of this case would be 3. So the 3's would go away and leaving 1's. The 3 really means nothing. It's not going to help you solve for n. It's just like a coefficient on the outside that creates a vertical stretch in the graph of the quadratic. So what I'm going to do now is analyze the inside of this equation. A would be 1, and B is 1, and C is 1. And I plug this into my quadratic formula. So it would be x equals -1 plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times 1 times 1, because everything's 1, and over 2 times 1. I got x equals -1 plus or minus the square root of -3 all over 2. You just need to simplify the inside of that radical. This breaks up into the square root of -1 and the square root of 3. And we all should know it by this point that the square root of -1 is I. And radical 3 stays, and then you're left with 2. So this is your final answer here.